Gurur Brahma, Gurur Vishnu, Gurur Devo Maheshwaraha, Gurureva Param Brahma, Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Chinmayam Vyapyat Sarvam, Trilokyam Sacharacharam, Tatpadam Darshitam Yena, Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Tvameva Mata cha Pita, Tvameva Bandhuscha Sakha, Tvameva Vedyat Ravitam, Tvameva Sarvam Mama Deva Deva, Tvameva Sarvam Mama Deva Deva. Om Sahana Bhavatu, Sahana Bhunaktu, Sahaviryam Karavavahai, Tejasvinavadhitamastu ma vidvishavahai. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. So where are we in our text?
We're on the second, actually the first Sanskrit mantra on page 10.
Okay. Will you help us out, please, Aditi?
Tanu tatra vividishas sanyasopetaha pandityado pravartamano api brahmana shabdena paramrishtaha tasmad brahmanaha pandityam nirvidya balyena tishtaset iti chet mevam bhavinim vrittimashritya tatra brahman shabdasya prayuktatvat anyatha katham ata brahmanah iti sadhananushthanottarakalavachina matha shabdam prayujiti. It cannot be doubted that the word brahmana refers to the seeker still engaged in learning, etc. in the text. Therefore let a brahmana, that's from the...
It's a quote.
Yeah. Because the word brahmana has been used with reference to the future state of the seeker. Otherwise, how could the particle thence, atha, meaning after the completion of all the conditions of self-realization, be used?
So here he's just basically dealing with grammar. It's not a big deal. The idea here is we're making a distinction for the renunciate, the sannyasi, between the brahmana, meaning the person of the priest caste, who's a jinyasu, a seeker after liberation, as opposed to the paramahansa, the person who is established in Brahman, a knower of Brahman, a jnani. Going on.
Sharira brahmanena pi vidvat sannyasa vividisha sannyaso spashtam nirdishto etameva viditva munir etameva pravrajino lokamichantaha pravrajanti iti. In the Sharira Brahmana also, the renunciation of the seeker and the renunciation of the knower are clearly pointed out. Knowing it alone, one becomes a sage, muni. Desiring this world, the self, alone, monks renounce their homes.
So the idea here is that for the jnyasu, the seeker after Brahman, there is a practice of renunciation. I am in that stage of an adhikari, becoming a fit student, where I practice viveka. I discriminate between the real and the unreal, the self and the not self. And I practice vairagya, that desire to give up attachment to all enjoyments gained through the senses and all ideas of self. But for the person of wisdom, there is no longer a practice. Just like if you or I were to look at the candle on the table, there's no effort involved in knowing I'm not a candle. That's something wholly other. So for the jnyasu, the ego seems so close. It's very difficult to see the distinction. But once knowledge dawns on the mind, once that deep samadhi explodes the ego sense, then there's effortless abidance in the self. You're not a person anymore. So there is a distinction. This is what Vidyaranya is driving at. All right, next verse.
Munitvam mananashilatvam tachasati kartavyantare sambhavatityatartha sannyasa evabhidhiyate etachya vakyasheshaye spashtikritam etadhasma vetat purve vidwansaha prajna na kamayante kim prajaya karishyamo yesham no ayamatmayam lok iti te hasma putresha nayascha vittepshanayascha lokeshanayascha vyuthayat bhikshacharya charanti iti ayam lokaha ityaparokshena ityarthaha. The sagehood is the state of reflection, and that is
sorry, start again. Did you say state or sage?
Sage. The sagehood is the state of reflection, and that is possible when there is no other duty to be performed. So by this, sannyas alone is indicated. This has also been stated clearly in the remaining portion of the text. This is the reason for it. The ancient sages, it is said, did not desire children, thinking, "What shall we achieve through children, we who have attained this self, this world?" They, it is said, renounced their desire for sons, for wealth, and for the worlds, and lived a mendicant's life. The words "this world" in the text mean that this self is being directly and immediately experienced.
Yes. So what he's inferring here, well, let me phrase it the way I usually do. I usually say self-realization is not difficult. You don't need a high IQ. You don't need to learn Sanskrit. You don't need to travel to the top of mountains. But it's very rare. And it's rare because nobody really wants it. The precondition is to remove ignorance. And my ignorance is kept in place by my conviction that the individuality is real and that the world is real, meaning it's inherently joy-giving and misery-producing. And what we have to be willing to do is let all that go. And it takes time. Realization of self happens instantly, but it takes time to go through the process of emptying out. It's what Gaudapada calls kashaya, the vomiting up of the unconscious. So if we want the world from the standpoint of time, you've got husband, you've got wife, you've got job, you've got kids, you've got relatives, you've got parties, you've got birthdays. All of those distractions keep us from committing to long and continuous meditation on the self. So the leaving of the world is not about the color of the cloth, the change of your name. Can you or I, to some degree at least, set aside the very precious time for God? That's what it takes. So I was just chatting last night with a student, it was Monday night, who got back from a 10-day meditation retreat, a Vipassana retreat. And again, deeper and deeper insights from just setting aside 10 days to spend the majority of the day in meditation. Well, how much is it going to take, Jim? It all depends on how gross the mind is. I can't tell you. Any thoughts on this? Now, you may be fortunate enough that your prarabdha has placed you in an environment where you don't have to work. Perhaps you have a spouse who makes enough, so it's not necessary, or you're retired. And you have the time to devote to sadhana. And yet, how many times have I seen people who say, okay, I'm going to take off from work for 6 months and devote to sadhana. And instead, they take that time to be a social butterfly. The mind still extroverts. Antithetically, you can still have a job. It still allows you plenty of time for sadhana. Next verse.
Nanvatra munitvena phalena pralobhya vividisha sannyasam vidhyaya vakyasheshe sa eva prapanchitaha ato na sannyasantaram kalpaniyam. Objection. The sagehood as the end is put forth as an inducement to the renunciation of the seeker, which, after prescribing, has been enlarged in the remaining text. So, no other kind of sannyas should be imagined.
I'm not sure what he's driving at. Let's see what the reply says.
Maivam vedanasyeva vividisha sannyasa phalatvat. Na cha vedana munitva yorekatvam shankaniyam viditva munirbhavati iti purvottara kalina yostayoha sadhya sadhana bhava pratiteha. Reply. No, this cannot be, since knowledge alone is the end of Vividisha sannyas. Nor can knowledge and sagehood be supposed to be identical, since in knowing it, one becomes a sage. Knowing precedes sagehood, and they have, as it appears, the relation of cause and effect.
Okay, so the idea here is, again, we have the indirect knowledge, Brahman is, the self is Brahman. Then, as the result of sannyas and sadhana, the knowledge dawns on the mind. Not that I know Brahman, but I am. That's the knowledge that then bestows sagehood. Now, just as when you look at your face in the mirror after the shower and the mirror is misty, you cannot see your face. Then if you turn on the fan, the mist goes away and you see your face in the mirror. That's what I look like. When you leave the bathroom, you know what your face looked like. You don't have to carry a mirror around to make sure your face is there. The knowledge of what you look like in the mirror bestows that knowledge even when you're walking around. Likewise, in the clear mirror of an extremely quiet mind, the intellect has this kratya vijnana. There's nothing there. I am. With that knowledge, no matter what state the mind is in, you never lose yourself. What do you ever know? So this is what other scriptures call sahaja samadhi, natural or continuous samadhi, which is the effortless knowledge of our self-nature. It is preceded by that moment of recognition, of pratyabhijnana. And that's the cause and effect that I think Vidyaranya is talking about. Going on.
Nanu vedanasyeva paripakatishayarupa mavasthanantar munitvam ato vedana dvara purva sannyasasyevaita phalamiti chet barhaman ata eva sadhana rupa sannyasādanyam phalarupametam sannyasam brumaha. If it is maintained that sagehood is but the mature state of knowledge, and as such the result of vividisha sannyas attained through knowledge, we confirm, which is why we say this resultant sannyas is different from the other sannyas, which is the means.
So the knowledge of the sage is that I am completely unattached to anything. It is a sahaja sannyasa. It's a natural or continuous renunciation, which is different than the practice of discrimination and renunciation of the jinyasu. That's the point that I think Vidyaranya is getting at. So the person of wisdom has given up sadhana as a method to know the self. It's no longer necessary. There's no effort or practice. Going on.
Yatha vividisha sannyasina tattvagnānaya shravanādini sampadanyani tatha vidvat sannyasinapi jivan muktaye manonasha vasanakshayo sampadaniyo. Etacho parishtat prapancha yashyamaha. As a sannyasin in the seeker's stage should perform study, etc., for the realization of the ultimate truth, So the one in the knower's stage should practice cessation of the mind and the effacement of the desires in order to attain Jivan Mukti, or liberation in life. We shall deal with these in detail later on.
Yes. So, what is the state of the jinyasu? She is still in the state where I'm a person, my goal is moksha, and I'm still making efforts towards it. But what does the Muni, the person of wisdom, do? They see the fundamental unreality of a personal sense of self, the illusory nature of any goal, and the essential nature of suffering inherent in struggle. So they are practicing or seeing, there's not even a practice anymore, of manodasha, the destruction of the mind. This doesn't mean a frontal lobotomy. Here, mind simply means these three ideas. I think I'm a person, I have a goal, and I'm making efforts. I was working with a student last night, and he's in what I call the yo-yo state. Sometimes he knows, sometimes he doesn't. Sometimes he knows, sometimes he doesn't. He came in, sat on the couch, and the no thing of his essential nature is very clear to him when he's sitting on my couch. No doubts. But somehow he loses it out there in the world. Now, he is different than those who have no experience of their essential nature. He has something real with which to work. So I took him back to Shloka 267 in Viveka Chudamani, one of my favorites, where Shankara says, even after realization of the truth, you've got some direct experience, there exists a beginningless impression that one is the doer and the enjoyer, karta, bhokta cha, which is the cause for rebirth. Rebirth here doesn't mean next lifetime I come back as a lizard. It means I get re-identified. Varana Shakti comes down, and then all of a sudden, Jiva Bhavana, I think I'm a person, then I've got goals, and I've got struggle. Does this state sound familiar to any of you? Many of you are in the same place. Shankara says this needs to be conscientiously rooted out through steady and continuous identification with the self. So what happens? We leave satsang, we leave class, we go out into the world, and the sense objects become the triggering device for my vasanas. And always remember, a vasana has two powers. Varana Shakti veiling, Vikshepa Shakti projecting. The essence of that veiling power is in my mind, I forget my essential nature, the non-apprehension of my essential nature. Then comes Vikshepa Shakti. Then I think I'm a person. How do I get rid of it? Through steady and continuous identification with the self. This is a practice we do in the world. When that idea of a personal sense of self arises, having the subtlety and the courage to drop it. If my heart moves with upset, which is always nothing more than some form of karma, without exception, I'm the one with the klesha, with the affliction. I'm the one with the dosha, the defect. I'm the one with the avarana shakti. The veiling power is operative. Drop it, drop it. And then Shankara ends the verse. It is the annihilation of the vasanas here and now that is considered liberation by the wise. This is the point that Vidyaranya is addressing. Any thoughts on this? Next verse.
Right. Satyapyanayoh sannyasayorvantar bhede parahamsa karene kritya chaturvidha bhikshavaha iti smritishu चतुसंख्योक्ता पूर्वोत्तरयोरुभयो सन्न्यासयो परमहंसत्वं जाबालश्रुतावगम्यते तत्र हि जनकेन सन्न्यासे पृष्टे सति याज्ञवल्क्यो विधानेनोत्तरकालानुष्ठेयेन च सहितं विविदिषासन्न्यासमभिधाय पश्चादितृणा यज्ञोपवीतरहितस्याक्षिप्ते ब्राह्मण्ये सति पश्चादात्मज्ञानमेव यज्ञोपवीतमिति समादधौ अतो बाह्य यज्ञोपवीताभावात् परमहंसत्वं निश्चीयते. Although there is difference between these two renunciations, including them in the Paramahansa category, the Smriti texts speak of 4 kinds of sannyasins. There are 4 kinds of mendicants. That the former and the latter sannyas, both are of the Paramhans class, is known from the Jabala Upanishad. In the Jabala Upanishad, Yajnavalkya on being asked by Janaka about sannyas, speaks about the special duties according to the stages of life which are to be performed according to the scheme, and then about the seeker's renunciation, Vividisha sannyas. Afterwards, when Atri objects that a Brahmana without a sacred thread is no Brahmana, he solves the problem by saying that the self-knowledge is the real sacred thread. So, from the absence of the external sacred thread, his belonging to the Paramhamsa class is determined.
So again, this is pretty much aimed at those people in that historical and cultural context who have as the idea, I'm a Brahmin, I'm somehow special, the sacred thread, meaning I've been initiated with Gayatri mantra. And what Vidyaranya is saying here is that's not the mark of the knower of Brahman, which is what a real Brahmana is supposed to mean. And in fact, today, when you take the Diksha of initiation, if you're a Brahmin, you give up the sacred thread. When you are a sannyasi, you do not have the thread anymore. But also, the implication here is it's not about a station of the body. It is only the body and the subtle body that have stations of life, orders of caste, etc. The mark of the Paramahansa is that she knows I am Brahman. Brahman has no sacred thread. So if you think you are some status of a person, and again, people who enter into religious life, East and West, can be identified with being on the path itself. I had a dear friend, rest his soul, he's no longer with us, who was a Buddhist, as was his partner. And his partner had been practicing Buddhism for some time. And they were going through, what is it, the initiation into, I can't remember what they called it, taking on certain stages of practice. And my friend Ralph was saying, oh, I'm just so surprised that his partner David hadn't advanced more in Buddhism. And, you know, on another level, that is the most absurd notion in the world. The whole point of sadhana is to give up identification with the ego sense. Who is it who thinks he's advancing? Who is it who has some pride, perhaps? And it can take all sorts of forms. Oh, I had the darshan of Swami such and such and so and so. Oh, I went to the ashram of this great Mahatma. I have done this. And then study. I've studied this, I've studied that. Or that you are quoting, Thich Nhat Hanh says this, and Krishnamurti says that. It's all an attempt to impress ourselves in the end. And I'm not saying these practices are not useful, but they themselves become problematic when the ego starts to own them as a possession. This is what the great Tibetan monk Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche used to call spiritual materialism, when the path itself has become a possession. Don't try to be a Paramahansa. Don't try to be Jivan Mukta. No personal sense of self is real. You are that vast, empty space of pure awareness. Never the knower of the equipment. You are beyond all mind states. Next verse.
Tathanyasyan kanditkayam tatra paramhansanam ityu prakramya sanvartakadibimba hun brahmavito Jivan Muktanu Dashitya Avyaktalinga Avyaktachara Anunmatta Unmatta Vadacharantaha Iti Vidvatsanyasino Darshitaha. So, in another Gandhika of the same, beginning with Paramhansas are, citing the examples of Samvartaka, Aruni, etc., many knowers of Brahman, i.e., realized souls who are Jivan Muktas, Vidvat Sannyasins, are shown by saying thus: they are without the signs of ashram, bound by no forms of conduct, although not mad, but behaving like madmen.
So, the way I like to frame it is the person of steady wisdom is out of control. Meaning, there's no longer this personal sense of self with a recipe for life, regretting the past, worrying about the future, thinking I'm going to have a plan, and the fulfillment of this plan is what's going to make me happy. Understanding that prarabdha, the fructifying karmas of the past, will move the body here or there. But the jnani has no particular concern and fundamentally no relationship. It may be their prarabdha to wear the orange cloth and have a position in an organization. Or they may just be a wandering mendicant. They may be like Ramana Maharshi, who ran around in a loincloth and lived on a mountain. Or they may be a simple housewife. So all these descriptions are basically for those of us in ignorance. They have no relevance to the sage. Next verse.
Tatha trikandam kamandalu shikyam patram jalapavitram shikham yagyopavitam chetyet sarvam hu sahetyapsu parityajyatmana manvichet iti tridandinah sat ekadandalakshanam vividishasanyasam vidhyaya tatphalarupam vidvatsanyasameva mudajahara yatha jata rupadharo nirdvandho nishparigrahastatra brahma marge samyak sampannah shuddhamanasah pranasandharanartham yathokta kale vimukto bhekshamacharan nuddara patrena labhalabhayo samo bhutva shunya garadeva grihatrina kutat valmika vriksha mula kulala shala nihotra griha deepulina giri kuhara kandara kotar ranichharasthandila leshva niketa vasya prayatno nirmamaha shukla dhyana parayano adhyatmanishtaha shubha shubha karma nirmulana paraha sanyasena dehatyagam karoti sa paramahanso nama iti. And the manner of taking to the seeker's renunciation, marked by one staff, has been prescribed for Tridandins thus. These staffs, water pot, begging bowl, with the suspension strainer, top knot, and sacred thread, all these to be offered to the Bhurlok, i.e. the earth, reciting the formula, oblation to Bhu, and throwing them into water and seek the self. Then, Vidvat Sannyas, the knower's renunciation, which is the end of the former since it leads to the latter through self-knowledge, is described thus. The Paramahansa is precisely he who is like a newborn baby. whose mind is free from the effects of the pairs of opposites, devoid of all possessions, who is firmly established in the way of Brahman, i.e., the final emancipation, whose mind is free from all desires, who, just to maintain life without any obligation, goes about begging at the prescribed time, using his belly as the begging bowl, and is unperturbed whether he gets it or not, without a fixed dwelling, lives in anywhere from a derelict house, a temple, a haystack, under a tree, in a pottery, in a house where sacrificial fire is kept, on the riverside, in a mountain cave or chasm, in a hollow tree, through a sacrificial place built near a spring, devoid of any effort, without the feeling of I and mine, ever meditating on the pure spirit, grounded in the Supreme Self, extirpating all good as well as evil actions, gives up his body with complete detachment.
So here again, the distinction, quoting from scripture, about the person who's taken vows of renunciation, who may have the staff, the begging bowl, the shaved head, the orange cloth, the gata, the water pot, who is identified as a sannyasi, as a station of life, is different than the Muni, the Jnani, the Paramahamsa, who may or may not have external signs of renunciation, is at home anywhere because they are Aniket Chaitanya. They have the consciousness of homelessness. They've put the robot of the body, mind, intellect on automatic pilot. Let it fulfill its prarabdha in the world. Impelled by the force of the past and the desires of other people, neither craving anything nor rejecting anything. Not concerned with this world at all. Who has quit believing in the mind itself. Therefore has no concern for it. Yet to other people can look like a silly fool or look like a very productive person like King Janaka. May not be a teacher, or may be a Jagat Guru like Swamiji. Can't tell by the outside. For you and me, it's pointless to try to discern the mind states of other people. There's no value in it at all. All of these things are for us to check out our own side. So, at least for a few minutes of the day, can you be this total renunciate? Give up care for the world. And again, I always go back to Gita, chapter 2, where in verse 54, Arjuna asks Krishna, what are the marks of the Stitha Prajna Purusha, the person of steady wisdom? How do they walk? How do they talk? How do they sit? They stand. And as is typical in the literature, the total answer comes first, then he breaks it down. So, verse 55, when a person casts off all the desires of the mind, O Partha, and is satisfied in the self by the self, then they are said to be a person of steady wisdom. Next verse.
तस्मादन्योरुभयोः परमहंससत्त्वं सिद्धं समाने अपि परमहंसत्वे सिद्धे विरुद्धधर्माक्रान्तत्वादवान्तरभेदो अप्यभ्युपगन्तव्यः विरुद्धधर्मत्वं चारुणिकोपनिषत्परमहंसोपनिषदो पर्यालोचनायामवगम्यते केन भगवन् कर्माणि अशेषतो विसृजामि इति शिखाय योपवीत स्वाध्याय गायत्री जपाध्य शेष कर्म त्याग रूपे विविधीश संन्यासे शिष्येणारुणिना पृष्ठे सति गुरुः प्रजापति शिखां यज्ञोपवीतम् इत्यादिना सर्वत्यागमभिधाय दण्डमाच्छादनं कौपीनं च परिग्रहेत् इति दण्डस्वीकारं विधाय त्रिसन्ध्यादौ स्नानमाचरेत् सन्धिं समाधावात्मन्याचरेत् सर्पेषु वेदश्वारण्य कमावर्तयेत् उपनिषद्मावर्तयेत् इति वेदन हेतुनाश्रम धर्मानुष्ठेयतया vidhate. From the foregoing text, Paramahansahood of them both is established. Although their state of being Paramahansa is valid equally, their mutual differences are to be admitted, for they possess some opposite qualities. By the detailed consideration of Arunika and Paramahansa Upanishads, the contradistinction of these two sannyas becomes clear. O Lord, how can I renounce all the actions? The disciple Aruni asks his teacher Pragyapati about the renunciation of all actions, i.e., the seeker's renunciation, marked by the giving up of the tuft of hair on the head, the sacred thread, and the studies of the Vedas, the muttering of the Gayatri hymn, etc. The teacher, Prajnapati, gives him instructions on renouncing all actions by saying, the tuft of hair, etc., and enjoins to accept a staff, mantle, and loincloth by saying, you should accept the staff, etc. And then he goes on to prescribe, you should take bath at the three sandhyas during meditation, concentrate on the self, study the Aranyaka part of the Vedas and the Upanishads. Thus, the special duties of the sannyas period of life, which lead to knowledge, are prescribed for practice.
So he's summing up this section that once we've taken up renunciation as a way of life, it will lead to realization. Swamiji used to use the example of if you're taking a long trip, especially nowadays with all the security and stuff like that, you get in your Uber and you on your way to the airport and there's all the traffic, and then when you get to the airport you check in your stuff, and then what do they call the security thing? You have to stand in line, you go through the wand and stuff like that. TSA, yeah. You got to go through all that, take your shoes off, etc., etc., etc. Then you go to the gate, and then they check you in, you get your seat assignment, and then you wait and wait and wait. And then finally they load the plane, and then in time the plane taxis out to the runway. And then you're waiting on the runway, and then finally the pilot says, flight crew, prepare for takeoff. So the flight attendants strap themselves in, down the runway you go, and then you lift off, and you go, finally, we're on our way. So also, all the things we go through to get to the point where I actually just make the decision, enough of this world, enough of my stupid suffering. I've come to the point where I have the shraddha, the real belief in the validity of the teaching. What I want is moksha. These external signs of the choti, the tuft of hair, the orange cloth, the danda, the staff, are only the externals of that internal decision. I'm done with the world. What Vidyaranya is saying is, you're as good as there when you reach that point. Then in a comparatively short period of time, not always, but it usually takes 2.5 years, once you've reached that point. And then wisdom dawns. Then there's the fulfillment of your vow of renunciation. Now, just as sometimes we get to the airport, we go through the TSA really fast, only took 30, 40 minutes. For some people, the journey's short. Others of us, my God, it's an international flight. I spent 3 hours in the airport before we finally got on the plane. Others of us, It takes a long time till we finally have the deep insight, enough of this world. But once we've come to that point, then the process happens relatively quickly. That's the point Vidyaranya is saying. And again, you do not need to take formal sannyas. It's an inside job. Okay, I think this is a good place to start. What verse are we on for next week?
We're on the Sanskrit of page 15.
Okay, so that will be the first. Now, I need to let you all know that the following week, on the 8th, I have family visiting, and we will not have class on the 8th. But I will let you all know next week, and I'll send out a note to remind everybody. But we will have class next week on the 1st. Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadhaya Purnameva Vashishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Hari Om Sri Guru Pyo Namaha. Hari Om. Thank you all.